For 44 days, the world has been watching the most dangerous military standoff since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Right now, as you're watching this, a single miscalculation could trigger World War III. The Strait of Hormuz, a waterway just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, has become the choke point not just for 20% of the world's oil supply, but for global economic survival itself. American warships and Iranian Revolutionary Guard vessels are locked in a deadly game of maritime chicken, while negotiators in Islamabad work frantically to prevent a conflict that could reshape the world order forever. This crisis didn't emerge from nowhere. The roots trace back to April 1980, when Iran severed diplomatic ties with the United States following the embassy hostage crisis. Since then, Pakistan has served as Iran's protecting power in America, managing the diplomatic relationship between two nations that refuse to speak directly. The current confrontation represents the culmination of decades of proxy warfare, sanctions, and nuclear tensions that have defined Middle Eastern geopolitics since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. What makes this moment uniquely dangerous is the convergence of several factors that weren't present during previous crises. Iran's nuclear program has advanced significantly, regional proxy networks have expanded across multiple countries, and global energy markets have become more interconnected than ever before. The Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign, combined with Iran's increasingly aggressive responses, created a powder keg that finally exploded 6 weeks ago. Unlike previous confrontations that remained largely contained to diplomatic channels or limited military strikes, this crisis has evolved into sustained combat operations involving multiple theaters across the Persian Gulf region. The Pakistan-brokered ceasefire announced 3 days ago came after the most intensive 48 hours of combat since the conflict began. Iranian Revolutionary Guard speedboats conducted coordinated swarm attacks against 3 commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, while simultaneously launching drone strikes against the American naval base in Bahrain. The USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group responded with precision strikes against Iranian naval facilities at Bandar Abbas, marking the first direct American attack on Iranian sovereign territory since the 1980s. Oil prices spiked to over $150 per barrel before crashing to $92 following news of the ceasefire agreement. The temporary truce was negotiated through emergency channels established between Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with Pakistani Prime Minister serving as the intermediary. However, both sides are interpreting the ceasefire terms differently, creating dangerous ambiguity about what actions might constitute violations. Iranian officials insist that American naval patrols in the strait constitute provocative behavior that undermines the agreement, while the Trump administration maintains that freedom of navigation operations will continue regardless of Iranian objections. The United Arab Emirates has demanded explicit guarantees that any final settlement must ensure uninterrupted access through the Strait of Hormuz, reflecting broader Gulf state concerns about energy security. Donald Trump finds himself managing the most serious international crisis of his presidency, with domestic political pressures complicating his strategic calculations. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who banned direct negotiations with the United States in August 2018, faces his own internal challenges from hardline Revolutionary Guard commanders who view compromise as weakness. Pakistan's role as mediator puts Islamabad in an extraordinarily delicate position, as the country maintains crucial relationships with both Washington and Tehran while managing its own complex security challenges. The Pakistani government has proposed a 3-phase de-escalation process that would begin with a permanent ceasefire, followed by negotiations over broader regional security arrangements, and ultimately addressing the underlying issues that triggered the crisis. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has privately urged Trump to maintain maximum pressure on Iran while publicly calling for restraint to prevent regional escalation. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman faces the complex challenge of supporting American efforts while protecting Saudi oil infrastructure from potential Iranian retaliation. Regional proxy groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Houthi forces in Yemen, have mobilized in response to Iranian directives, creating multiple potential flashpoints beyond the immediate Persian Gulf theater. For India, this crisis represents a perfect storm of economic and strategic challenges that strike at the heart of national security planning. India imports approximately 85% of its crude oil requirements, with roughly 60% coming from the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz choke point. Every day this crisis continues costs the Indian economy an estimated $2 billion in higher energy prices and supply chain disruptions. The Indian government has activated emergency petroleum reserves and accelerated negotiations with Russia and Venezuela for alternative oil supplies, but these efforts cannot fully offset potential Hormuz disruptions. Prime Minister Modi faces the delicate diplomatic challenge of maintaining India's strategic partnership with the United States while preserving crucial energy relationships with Iran. India's Chabahar port investment in Iran, worth over $500 million, represents a key component of connectivity to Afghanistan and Central Asia that could be jeopardized by escalating American sanctions. The Indian Navy has quietly enhanced its presence in the Arabian Sea, with 3 destroyers and a submarine now positioned to protect Indian commercial vessels transiting the region. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh held emergency consultations with military leadership about potential evacuation scenarios for the 8 million Indian expatriate workers across the Gulf states. The crisis has also accelerated India's renewable energy timeline, with the government announcing expedited solar and wind projects to reduce long-term dependence on Middle Eastern oil imports. 3 scenarios are emerging from current intelligence assessments about how this crisis might resolve. The optimistic scenario involves successful Pakistani mediation leading to a comprehensive agreement that establishes new rules of engagement for the Persian Gulf, similar to the Cold War hotline agreements between Washington and Moscow. The catastrophic scenario sees ceasefire violations triggering full-scale warfare that draws in regional allies, disrupts global energy supplies for months, and potentially escalates to nuclear threats. The most likely scenario involves a series of rolling temporary ceasefires that prevent immediate warfare while failing to address underlying tensions, creating a perpetual state of crisis management that keeps oil markets volatile and regional powers on edge. Intelligence analysts are watching for 3 key indicators that could signal which direction events are heading: Iranian proxy group activities in Syria and Iraq, American naval positioning around the Strait, and Chinese diplomatic interventions aimed at protecting Beijing's energy security interests. One surprising development that few are anticipating is the possibility of Turkey inserting itself as an alternative mediator, leveraging its unique relationships with both Iran and NATO to potentially bypass Pakistani efforts. What we're witnessing isn't just another Middle Eastern crisis that will fade from headlines in a few weeks. This confrontation is fundamentally reshaping global energy security, military alliances, and economic relationships in ways that will define international relations for the next decade. The fragile ceasefire holding today represents either the first step toward a new framework for managing US-Iran tensions, or the brief calm before a storm that could engulf the entire region in warfare. Oil markets, shipping companies, and governments worldwide are making contingency plans based on the assumption that this crisis is far from over, regardless of temporary diplomatic successes in Islamabad. The next 72 hours will likely determine whether negotiators can transform this precarious ceasefire into something more durable, or whether the world is heading toward its first major power conflict of the 21st century. If this briefing gave you a clearer picture of what's happening in the world, subscribe to Global Briefing Room, new intelligence briefing every day. What do you think will be the trigger that either saves or destroys this ceasefire?